Hi.
Oh yeah.
And, well, I'll say it again. Hi, and welcome to the Scott and Loz Show with...
Scott Oh, I don't think they were ready for that one.
Like I said a couple of episodes ago, we're sat on a plethora of jingles now, waiting to just be shoehorned in. So I will shoehorn one in there.
Please do. You're the oh my god, I've already forgotten the name of the Jingle Whisperer is the closest I've got.
The Jingle Whisperer, yeah, Chief Shoehorner. Both of those are on my business card. So, right. I suppose, as is again tradition, I feel like I always start every episode with issuing a series of apologies, and not that there are any, real apologies in order, but I do just want to say, if you've listened to, well, I hope you have, of course, the Honourable Festival of Mentions.
Indeed.
Thank you. I hope that you've gone off and checked out some of these bands because they're amazing. I wouldn't have mentioned them if they weren't. But just, like I say, just apologise that really I feel like the last 3 episodes were the Scott show in a way. And not that your marvellous presence, Loz, wasn't felt, but just that I kind of dominated the discussion. I was proposing all these bands, and then, you were maybe chiming in with a couple of minutes of, opinion on the ones that you'd heard of. So I just want to say that I'm thrilled that we're probably going to be returning to parity in terms of airtime in this episode. And that, of course, is because we've got to the top 10 now.
I was going to say to you, actually, this is going to be my little challenge to you. And I don't expect you to do, particularly like a massive deep dive. But at the same time, I am challenging you to try and find some musical fills from at least some of my choices, because there's been so many and they've all been your choices, obviously, which is obviously completely fine. But that's my challenge to you, is to try and find where you can a little like lick or a fill or something that you can.
Loz, I would be delighted to accept that challenge. And I threw in a little lick from Forgot About Dre in one of the past ones we did.
Yeah,
and
I think you did, yeah. Actually,
something tells me that album's going to come up again, and I bloody well hope it does, quite frankly.
It may well. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, the last episode was quite long, and, well, that was because we spent an hour talking about Opeth, which, quite frankly, was not long enough.
It wasn't an hour wasted, was it?
No, it was an hour thoroughly enjoyed. Yeah, I put quite a few little licks in from there. Whether I chose the right moment, A, the moment in the podcast to insert one, and B, the moment in, the band's discography, the right riff or whatever to insert. I don't know, but it was fun recording them. And most of them I knew anyway, because, like I say, I discovered Opeth about the age of 17 or 18, and they were the band that spurred me to challenge talking about challenging myself, Loz. I challenged myself to just learn some of these riffs that, to be honest with you, aren't particularly easy to play. And having only really picked up a guitar, like a month or so before I got into the band, I remember the frustration at trying to learn some of those riffs. And I am typically, I won't mind saying it, the kind of person that puts down a hobby at the first sign of any difficulty, But thankfully, I got through that wall, and I got through about 15 others along the way. And so, here I am, at least able to play those riffs to insert, and I'm glad I did. And we spent a long time discussing Opeth, and we've spent 2 minutes in this podcast discussing Opeth. But I suppose I just want to say, to not addressing you here, Loz, but to you, the dear listener, that if you quite liked the sound of some of those riffs, and I would imagine, whether you're into music or not, hearing Loz and I discuss the career trajectory of Opeth must have been quite interesting, because it was, at least I feel like it would have been quite an interesting thing to listen to, because
they've got an interesting story to tell.
Yeah. yeah, I still cannot believe that Opeth aren't going to get discussed here on. Well, they are, aren't they? Let's
They
face
are.
it. But, oh, yeah. So I am rubbing my palms together because, yes, Opeth are going to get discussed down the line. So that's fantastic. And I suppose, actually, one final little apology that I think there were quite a lot of metal bands that were discussed along that festival dimensions. And I'm assuming most people listening just aren't really into metal, which is fine because most people aren't into metal. But I do hope that I kind of conveyed my point along the way that they're special. You know, I'm quite picky when it comes to metal. I don't spend the majority of my time when I'm listening to music listening to metal. It's just that there are certain bands that really resonate with me and that I love as much as any other band, you know? So,
well, in all fairness, Hughes, this is a celebration of good music, and it's music you feel is good. I think that's as much explanation as we really need. Because again, I mean, if you're not into metal, you might take solace in my top 10 because there's one mention and that's it. But
well,
but yeah.
Curiously, I think off the top of my head, there's only one what you call metal album in my top 10. So there was a lot of metal discussed prior to this episode, but actually going forward, at least from my point of view, it sounds as if Loz and I are going to be putting forward the same amount of metal, which just, I don't know why, that just sounds weird. But yeah, I love some metal bands, and I've talked about them, and I won't again. But yeah, my top 10 albums don't really feature metal, with the exception of one, which is probably the most fucking metal album of all time.
Right, we're starting to jump the gun here, so let's bring it back, reset, rewind, and let's kick on.
So, Loz, because I feel like I've dominated the last few episodes with just discussing bands and stuff, I would be delighted, if you're willing to do so, for you to start the top 10 as we did with the films, I believe. And I suppose we'll see just how many we get through in typical. I mean, when we did the films, did we do? I think we did 10, 9, and 8 each, didn't we?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I mean, let's see if we can do that again in kind of conventional podcast length.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable target to hit.
It'll just take its natural path, and quite frankly, I would not wish to curtail any discussion just for the sake of keeping it within an hour or something. So let's just do what we do best: two dicks talking bollocks.
Right. Okay. Well, as far as I'm concerned, again, as I was keen to point out with the intelligent dance music and that sort of conversation, I've always been keen to find
unintelligent double glazing salesman.
Yeah, too right. I was keen to point out my sort of frustration with sort of fairly artless music, and it is, somewhat of a double-edged sword, because I've enjoyed sort of throwaway music but at least even that has somewhat of a craft to it. And at number 10, I have quite possibly the most artful of all the rappers in the game, personally, at the moment. He's somebody who I personally admire. He's somebody who I think spends almost too much time thinking about not only his place in the world and how he can use his position and his platform to affect things, but also he holds himself to a certain standard, and I really admire that. So before we get too further along, we're talking about Kendrick Lamar, and the album we're talking about is To Pimp a Butterfly.
Okay.
Now, I enjoy this album immensely, but I always remember Clem, who is my rap partner, as it were.
Lars, I've looked to my left on my shelf of CDs, and I've got Clemcy on Gambling in there. Clem, if you're listening, I'm going to listen to that straight after this.
It's worth a listen.
Anyway, sorry, Lars. Kendrick Lamar. I'm so sorry. I'm going to sit back and shut my mouth. Please continue.
So basically, I was talking to Clem, and he was talking to me about how To Pimp a Butterfly was, I think he said, his biggest disappointment that year, and I was really quite shocked. It's not your standard rap fare, I must say.
Is it his first album?
No, it's the second album. The
Ah,
first
okay,
one was
so I
was
take it Clem was a big fan, and maybe he went in expecting maybe something that just didn't deliver to him personally. Maybe.
well, I mean, I think Kendrick had done a project before his sort of major studio debut, which was Good Kid, Mad City, and
Right.
apparently he'd sort of had it in his mind that the first album it's your debut, so you've got to smash it out the park. I mean, especially in rap, or you're just going to be forgotten. So there were records on there that I think he openly said, we went for what's going to play on the radio. I wouldn't call it a commercial album by any sense. It's still got plenty of meaning and depth to it, but
Commercially minded at the same time, sort of thing.
yeah, I think he was certainly mindful of trying to make an impact in the mainstream and that sort of thing.
Well,
But in
I
into
don't
Pimp a
begrudge
Butterfly,
anyone for doing that. So yeah, go on.
well, that's it. You've got to get your foothold, haven't you? He'd said, this was the album that he'd always wanted to make, almost ever since that he'd got into making music, and that was sort of a more holistic album for him and the people he'd grown up around. And I also believe that he took a trip to Africa before writing this, and had taken a lot of sort of inspiration from that. And
Any idea where in Africa? Just out of interest, because it's a surprisingly diverse continent.
well, I think we're talking about South Africa because I think he went to visit Mandela's jail cell. So,
Okay.
yeah, South Africa.
I've always wanted to go to South Africa, and in particular Cape Town, and in particular within Cape Town, Newlands, the cricket ground that. Sorry, this is what I do, isn't it? You're talking about Kendrick Lamar, and I steer it towards cricket. I'm so sorry.
And cricket has no place here.
What?
Basically, I think one of the reasons why Clem and perhaps a few people, like you say, they'd heard the first album, and it was gangster rap for lack of a better term. Although I think it's probably come on a bit from in terms of consciousness than perhaps some people might be familiar with. But yeah, basically to Pimp a Butterfly, it has almost like a jazzy feel to it. I mean, there's especially one song that has some sort of freestyle jazz going on in the background. One of my favorite tracks, which I believe that the track is called "This Dick Ain't Free." But yeah,
I mean,
for free. Yeah, it's an
This Dick
interlude
Ain't For
technically.
Free.
Yeah, it's just called "For Free," but that's
for
very
free.
much.
Oh, I see.
This
Okay,
dick ain't free.
I don't know why, Lars, but I don't think it necessarily sounded Welsh when you said that, but I interpreted it in a Welsh,
This dick ain't free, right?
yeah.
Oh, listen here. I'm from Compton, and this dick is not free. All right.
Whenever I think of Welsh accents, I think of the name Michael Carrick, even though it's there's nothing Welsh about either Michael Carrick or indeed the name Michael Carrick, but it just comes off the tongue nicely in a Welsh accent. Michael Carrick.
It does. There's no denying that.
Right. Anyway, back on the freeway. I'm not an expert on Kendrick Lamar or indeed really hip hop, and I guess that'll probably come up time and time again. But I really need to go off and listen to this album because I'm aware of its status, quite legendary, really. In terms of, I mean, I don't really know what you'd call modern hip hop, but let's say this side of the millennium. It is absolutely considered one of the in the pantheon. And I think as I understand, he's quite inventive with like his use of samples and things like that. And so I don't necessarily see that as theft or plagiarism, to incorporate someone else's work into your own. Not at all. I'm very sorry to go off on a tangent here, and I promise I'll keep this very quick. But there's another hip hop artist who sadly died very recently. But the album's Mad Villainy, and I'm sorry if this comes up at any point, Lars, for you. I don't know.
No, you carry on.
I can't remember the guy's name.
It's MF Doom.
Yeah, MF Doom.
R.I.P.
Yeah. And yeah, he did that with Mad Villainy and Gentle Giant, a band that came up earlier on in this music series. They were sampled, and in fact, Gentle Giant recently came out and were grateful of that. Because of the kind of just the exposure, them living on passively through other artists, but also because they just thought it was quite tastefully done.
Well, and also again, stop me if I'm wrong. I believe you're more familiar with sort of Flying Lotus, and they've famously collaborated with Kendrick.
Yeah, Flying Lotus. I'm kind of Look, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I was like a massive fan of any of this stuff, really. But yeah, Flying Lotus has a connection with my number 10, actually. So if I remember, I'll reprise Flying Lotus in discussion there. But no, please, Lars, do continue talking about Kendrick Lamar, because I can't really remember anything off this album. I think I've heard it, or at least I've listened to some of it. But maybe we should do what we're in the process of doing with the films. You know, we'll meet up, we'll have a couple of ciders, we'll sit in a comfy chair each, not sharing a comfy chair, and we shall listen to, in fact, if you give me 2 seconds here, and either I'll cut this out of the podcast or I won't, just to make it seem more natural. I don't know. In fact, I'll narrate what I'm doing right now. I'm flipping my notepad open, I'm clicking my pen, and I'm creating another Scott and Lars list here. And so this list will begin with Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly.
Now, again, for those non-rap listeners out there, I would encourage you to give it a listen. I think it's probably out of all the choices that I've made, certainly in the rap category, it will probably be the most accessible to you. And on that theme, I'd like to recommend the track "All Right" as your sort of your nominated track from me.
Oh yeah, and in fact, you might have to remind me to do this with mine, because I think I kind of might have forgotten to choose a introductory track on some of mine. So I'm not sorry. I don't mean to put that on you, but like I might forget to do that with mine. And actually, I really want to make sure that I do. So sorry, Lars. What was the name of that track? Because I'll write that down as well.
It's called "All Right." There's plenty of banging tracks on there, but I felt that was the track that sort of fairly encapsulates what you might get from it without delving you into the deepest parts of it, sort of thing. You know, it's cool. It's a good opener.
And I get the feeling, do tell me if I'm grossly inaccurate, as I often am, but I get the feeling that Kendrick Lamar is quite diverse. So to pick a particular track, you know, might not be the easiest thing to do with someone like him.
And also, I mean, he is somebody who likes to involve a live band. And I mean, he's done live performances on a lot like the chat shows and stuff. And I've, you know, quite often you don't often see, you don't often see rappers do a lot of these spots just because typically their work isn't quite so diverse. And I think it was a performance he did with on the Ellen DeGeneres show, where he got sort of like a live dancer with live dancers with a band and sort of lights on the floor going off and stuff, and that was really good, different from the album, which, you know, I suppose it should be for a live performance, you know what I mean? But
that's cool. I get the feeling maybe sometimes, and I'm sure we won't talk about the kind of rap artists that I'm thinking of here, but I feel like sometimes with rap performances, they do the things you just talked about, but not for artistic merit, but just almost like to flesh it out to make it more interesting, because there's just not enough going on with what they're doing, and they have to make a spectacle of it in multi-sensory, you know.
Well, yeah, I was going to say I'm a big fan and remain so of like 50 Cent, and I remember once we'd got tickets to go to the Anger Management tour, which was like 50 Cent and D12, Eminem and Obi Trice and, you know, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, which would have been amazing. But at the same time, I remember seeing some footage of, I think it was definitely a 50 Cent part of a 50 Cent and Eminem gig, and it was like ridiculous amounts of like gunshot effects over the PA, and like massive clouds of smoke going off, and just like a massive skeleton in the middle of the ring stage would be the word.
Foghorns and like
yeah. It was going on as long as some of the songs, and I was just like, oh wow, okay, like,
Lars,
you know,
I've got a really specific memory involving 50 Cent and you, and it's a school trip to Drayton Manor, and it was in the club.
In
the club had just come out, but the album hadn't come out yet. However, it had leaked, so like it was available, through, oh god, what's the term?
What, LimeWire?
Well, yeah, LimeWire. Oh, what's the word I'm thinking of here? Like torrents, it was like
Yeah.
available through that medium. And I remember going on like, like waltzers, the sort of, you get in like a spinning cylindrical kind of disc thing.
Yeah, like the teacups.
Yeah, like teacups on steroids, essentially. And Drayton Manor had like one of those, and the guy was playing like the new 50 Cent album before it was released, and you and I had heard it because we were both interested, and it was just I don't know, it was just something.
And Clem was in with us as well, I swear.
Yeah, yes, because I remember 5-10 minutes before we all had to get on the coach to go home, Clem and I went on Storm Force 10 and got absolutely drenched. And I mean, I take it most people are listening from the UK, and you'll be on nodding terms with the weather that we have over here. And to go on Storm Force 10 at like 10 to 6 in the evening, and then get on a coach that wasn't any warmer, to be honest.
Well, I think you also were like keeping the coach from going for a start, and then they were just like, oh great, now he's going to soak the chair as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, just a prize pair of tits, basically.
But yeah, no, I remember exactly what you're talking about, and I remember at the time the pair of you both being like, oh, this is a really good song, and I didn't like it. And it wasn't until I bought his album that.
Do you mean in the club, or do you?
Yeah,
yeah.
It wasn't until I bought the whole album and I thought that sometimes, not just rap, but with a lot of things, you hear a newcomer, coming in, and there's so much sort of hype around it that it was almost a bit like everybody liked it so much that I was a bit like, and it wasn't until I sort of looked almost like beneath the hype and I was just like, oh yeah, okay, this guy's really believable. But that is not who we're talking about. We're talking about Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly. It's my number 10. I personally, Kendrick is one of the rap artists that I could listen to a lot more. But for me, he would get more mentions on this list if he wasn't so, he really feels a pressure that, as I said before, that he's got a position in society, but also in rap, and that he therefore makes certain stuff that's, quite retrospective or quite self-critical, or a lot of the exploration of the life in the hood, more so than probably more sensitively than we've heard on a lot of other albums. Well, and sometimes you don't want all that, you just want good music. And I'm not saying he doesn't make good music, but there are easier listens out there. That's what I'm saying.
In a way, I want to go back for 5 seconds and talk about 50 Cent, and you'll see why I'm going to make this relevant to Kendrick Lamar.
Okay.
In the Club came out, and indeed all of that album, right? And it was produced by Dr. Dre, wasn't it?
Yes.
But this is the thing for me with a lot of like rap hip hop, that I feel like the producer is every bit as important as the actual artist whose name is on the cover. Whereas I feel like with Kendrick Lamar, it's very much just 100% Kendrick Lamar record.
Yes.
And I look forward to listening to it properly, because I've not really sat down and given this the time and attention that it requires, I think.
I think you'll certainly find an appreciation for it. Well, I don't think it'll work its way into your regular listening, but I think you'll definitely not feel it's time wasted.
Well, it's on the list. I mean, I've written it down, so it's cast in ink and paper now, Lars. So that's it. It's getting listened to. Hopefully, very soon. All right, shall I get into my number 10 now?
Please.
Right. So. This feels like, like when we got to the top 3 movies, we were like, we've reached the mountaintop. I feel we're there already with this, because like the top 10 albums are just, I mean, if it hasn't already come across, then it probably won't during these top 10 albums, because I feel like my passion for music has probably come out as much already as it will do during these 10 albums, really. Anyway, so this is the album that sort of just edged out my favorite album by my favorite band. And I mean, like, of all the albums in this top 10, this is perhaps the one that's grown on me the most, actually. And that may come as a surprise to those that know this album, because actually it's immediately quite an accessible album particularly by their standards. And this is the first time I've mentioned this band, and it's Radiohead, and the album is In Rainbows.
Ah.
So this is a band that have been very divisive down the years, and to be honest, frustratingly so, because people think of the likes of like Creep and Fake Plastic Trees, things like that off the bends, that represented, I'd say, a stepping stone in their career. But they just don't sound like that anymore, and they haven't done for decades. Yeah. But I mean, in fact, the band don't like that part of their career. Tom York and I think the rest of them just hate playing Creep, because they almost don't hear themselves in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that stuff was when they were just starting out, and they underwent a lot of change between those songs in like something like 1997. And this album, which came out in 2007, and it's possibly better known for the story of the album rather than for the musical content of the album itself, because I don't know if you remember this, Lars, but they decided, in somewhat of a crusade against the emerging piracy at the time. Yeah, we just talked about LimeWire, the Pirate Bay, and all those websites, right? Sorry, other torrent websites are available.
Napster.
And in somewhat of a crusade against all that stuff, they employed a pay what you want scheme. And I'd love to know how much this album made for them, in comparison to before. And indeed, what the record label thought of that. Yeah. But I do remember going into HMV and buying this properly in my own little crusade, I guess. I mean, I don't know how much they make off each album. Well, let's say an album costs $9.99. My book is $9.99, I think. And I think I'm going to make something like £2 something, out of that. So let's say, probably £2 in total in terms of book sales. One sold. Yeah, it's like that meme where like someone just paid for a full version of WinZip and like the office goes wild.
Or like the bit from The Simpsons where it, like Lisa buys a copy of the book and it goes all the way back to Al Gore, and he's like in his office like, "Sir, someone just bought a copy of your book." And he's like, "Oh, well, all right then." Turns on the record player, like, "Celebrate good times, come on." I will.
I've heard that song so many times, and I've got a really fond association memory with that song, because whenever Brentford won a game at Griffin Park, they would play Celebrate at the end. So subsequently, I've got it kind of etched in my memory, associated with good times. And indeed, an element of sadness because Griffin Park is no more.
Indeed.
I'll tell you what, without wanting to go too off-road here, I'm a Brentford fan, if that wasn't already clear from the last sentence. And the game at the weekend, Brentford-Bournemouth in the playoffs, there were only 4,000 fans in the new stadium, but my goodness, the atmosphere. Anyway, we'll come back to football in another series, won't we?
It was a game worthy of note, certainly. I'll give you that.
I just, the gauntlet of emotion I went through watching that, I can't tell you.
I bet.
Right. In Rainbows, Radiohead. Yeah, so there's that whole story surrounding the album, but I don't want to dwell on that because that's not why this album made my top 10. It's just worthy of note. So, like I said, people often think of like Creep and the Bends, or even OK Computer, which was the third album. I mean, that's their famous record, isn't it? Let's face it. It often gets called the best album ever. I am the biggest Radiohead fan, but I'm sorry, it isn't. It's nowhere near it. We talked about, again, I talked about Steven Wilson and how people kind of associate him with melancholy and depression. And definitely you could say the same thing about Radiohead. People seem to take this stance that like, if you're into Radiohead, you're well depressing.
Yeah. They've certainly got that sort of stigma somehow.
Yeah, and quite frankly, a statement like that suggests far bigger emotional problems within them rather than within me for liking Radiohead.
Or a lack of maturity, perhaps.
So, I mean, In Rainbows is without question a joyous and uplifting record, like to incredible levels at times. Of course, for that to sort of really work its magic, it is kind of interspersed with some melancholy at times, for short periods, but that's not what you'd remember from this record. I mean, if you just listen to the first track, 15 Step, where they actually went into a primary school and recorded the cheering of a group of children. And it's not as if they were doing that to say, oh, see, we can be uplifting. They were doing it because it worked, like in the context of the song and indeed the record, which continues with Body Snatchers, one of my favorite Radiohead songs, which, again, I could say this about most of the album. I wasn't that keen on, like, when I first heard it. Like I said, at the start of this, it's grown on me massively. And it's not because I was ever opposed to the idea of Radiohead going upbeat, because they've done it on many previous albums. I see them as quite an upbeat band. But I think if I can try and recall, how I felt when I first heard this album, I think I felt that it was like too simple and like almost upbeat for the sake of it. But like the second half of Body Snatchers is just some of the catchiest rock music you'll ever hear. And then I suppose we're brought down to earth with the next track on the album called Nude, which is partially recorded backwards, which just kind of blows my mind. There's a couple of songs on this album that are recorded in a certain way that just blows my mind. That's one of them. But then we get into like track 4 on the album, which is called Weird Fishes / Arpeggi. Yeah, Weird Fishes is kind of the ultimate example of a track that I didn't think much of at all at first, but has grown to probably become my favorite Radiohead song ever.
Wow.
It skips along in this sort of sprightly manner, which I guess that was what I didn't like. It's got this kind of, the drum beat kind of sums up what I didn't like on first listen with this album, really. Yeah, like I say, it almost felt like this forced statement of like, hey, we can be upbeat. Hey,
Yeah, we'll increase the tempo and then you'll think we're jolly.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know why, but when I did that, I thought of It's Always Sunny, when they do the beauty pageant, and Charlie.
Oh, God.
Charlie's like, magic's in the air. For some reason, came to my mind when I was talking about that. But now, when I listen back to Weird Fishes, not only do I not hear any of that at all, I genuinely think it's the best thing they've ever written. It requires quite a few listens, this one, for it to really work its magic and to connect with you on a deep level. And yeah, it kind of builds to this crescendo and then somehow it even takes it somewhere better from there. Like it's glorious. So maybe that would be the track I'd recommend. I don't know. I mean,
nice.
I suppose so. Yeah, this is like around the halfway mark in the album. There's a song called All I Need, which again, didn't think much of when I first heard the album. It kind of plods along before kind of it just exploding into this really powerful moment that washes over you. And it's incredible. And I suppose to just continue with what I'm doing here, which is like a little whistle stop tour through the album. You've then got tracks. I can't remember every song off the top of my head in order, but I mean, one of the most notable songs is Reckoner. Which is a common favorite. I mean, Ace, if you're listening, and Dad, if you're listening, you are both huge fans of this song. I love it. It's fantastic, but it's not the first song I think of when I think of this record, if I'm being honest. But it's brilliant. And then we kind of get towards my personal other favorite from this album. And in fact, to negate what I said a minute ago, this is the one to listen to. This is my my suggestion as the song to stick on from this album. And I, although I tend to negate myself all the time, I'm not going to go back on this comment. This is the one to listen to, right? And it's called Jigsaw Falling Into Place. Again, it's the last minute or so of that song is honestly about as uplifting as I think music can get. It's amazing. I can't convey how that song makes me feel, but it's one of the most joyous, uplifting sections of music for me. And then it closes to just sort of end this album out, it closes with, admittedly, actually a very melancholic piece of music called Videotape, which is this song, I think Tom York has cited as the best thing they've ever done, or the best thing he thinks they've ever done.
Wow.
And I talked about sort of playing with form, that like with Nudes being recorded partially backwards and all this stuff. This song is really interesting. And it's an interesting one to try and convey to a potential like non-musically minded person, because it features something weirdly technical, which is like what's known as syncopation. So how can I make this point without it being really boring? Right. So when you hear the song, basically, I'll tap the table, right, as I do this. But so when you hear the song, you hear like dun, 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 and so you think that's the rhythm, but actually the band have done it in a syncopated way, where the chord, the piano bit, kicks in a 16th before the beat. So, for example, I'll tap in, and you'll see what I mean. Down, 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 down. So like the piano kicks in a 16th earlier than the start of the bar, if you like, and I guess that's probably the best way I can describe it. And when you listen to the song, you wouldn't know, but when you see them perform it live, you can see that they're interpreting it, or well, say interpreting it, they created it, didn't they? I mean, but you know what I mean, that they're hearing it in that way. And it kind of almost rewrites how the whole song goes. And yeah, like I say, you wouldn't necessarily know that when you just listen to it on the album.
Sure.
And so in that sense, it's very hard to perform. I've seen Tom York bugger it up live a couple of times, and he's like temporary loss of information. So, and then they have to start it again. I mean, if I've not described that well enough, which, let's face it, is a possibility, Loz. Just YouTube Radiohead Videotape, like Secret Rhythm or something like that, and someone else will explain it in much more of an erudite and articulate manner. Anyway, I wanted to just mention that because it's hard not to when talking about the song Videotape, but I kind of don't want to end on something technical like that, because this album's not about that. It's a very simple album, really. It's just kind of raw, joyousness. Joyousness? Well, I suppose joy is the word, isn't it? Let's face it.
Yeah.
So, Radiohead, In Rainbows, my number 10.
Now, I was, if I can just jump in very slightly, I was just thinking that perhaps I think what might sort of give it somewhat of its, because I think some people look at Radiohead as a bit pretentious, and I think some people it's a long way from your conventional like verse chorus verse chorus verse chorus end like type of band. Do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of the arpeggio singing and stuff like that, it can sort of put people off.
Well, we talked about vocalists, didn't we? And Tom York has this falsetto style, which I love. I love that. Sorry, Loz, carry on.
So no, I was just thinking, I think that's all part of the bundle, that they do seem like this mysterious band, and I think people naturally fear what they don't understand, and I think that's probably why they got such a devoted sort of core fan base. But I don't think they're quite as popular as perhaps their craft deserves. The only other thing that I really wanted to mention, sorry if I'm cutting you off there, Hughes.
No,
I apologize because I don't think it's on the same album, but I just wanted to. I mean, this is something that was introduced to me by Ace, and I will forever be thankful, because there's a YouTube video where I think it's Tom York and I think Johnny playing the numbers on a bench, like on two benches outside.
Oh yeah.
And it is absolutely beautiful. It's something that I keep coming back to, and as soon as we started talking Radiohead, I immediately looked it up on YouTube, just so I could say so now. And I've also lined up Jigsaw falling into place for later.
So yeah, the numbers is off. I think it's called The Numbers. It is off there, A Moon-Shaped Pool. I remember. I mean, we talked at length about Opeth having an interesting, career trajectory, and Radiohead definitely do. Like I said, they started out very, almost dare I say it, archetypal, just kind of rock, almost slightly grunge, with their first albums. A Moonshaped Pool is the last album they've done, and I always felt like it might even be the last one they ever do. And I remember so vividly, you know how you like associate hearing an album with the time and the place. And I was at Slough train station, such a romantic memory for me, waiting for this album to be released, because they had announced it almost at quite late notice, that this album's dropping tomorrow, by the way, and everyone went mental. And I paid for it on iTunes, and I remember waiting for the clock to tick 6 p.m. or something like that, so the album would become available. And I was at Slough train station, platform 2, I believe. And I remember boarding the train and the album sort of being suddenly available to listen to. And so that journey back to Pershaw was obviously occupied with listening to that album. And The Numbers was one of the ones that I immediately liked. And I mean, I'd love to talk about it, but I shouldn't really, because
rules is rules.
Yeah, exactly. So In Rainbows is an album. I suppose actually one final little point to make with this album is that actually seeing it live was what kind of really made it click, that made the jigsaw fall into place, pun intended. And it was seeing it live just did something to make it click. It's hard to describe, really. One of the best gigs I've been to. And again, Ace was present. And again, it was at the O2 Arena, I think. Amazing gig. Amazing. And it was off the back of In Rainbows. So naturally, they were playing quite a lot of that. And I'm glad they did, because if I hadn't been there for that performance, maybe it wouldn't be my number 10. I don't know. The album would have grown on me over time, I'm sure. But just seeing it live was incredible. And I just feel very blessed and grateful that I got to experience that. So, wow, we've almost occupied an hour talking about number 10 each. Well,
oh God,
let's do our number 9 as well.
Yes,
crack on, because I'm just excited to hear what's your number 9.
Sure. Okay. Well, in terms of the last album talked about, Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick is one of my personal favorite artists, and one of his sort of label mates on Black Hippie, I suppose isn't actually a label. He's with Top Dog.
Right.
Top Dog Entertainment, but they're also sort of co-signed to Aftermath, I do believe. But anyway, we're talking about Schoolboy Q, which is probably, as much as Kendrick is a really sort of introspective and thoughtful and almost at times sort of like a tortured celebrity rapper, Schoolboy, he is really sort of like a real, like, I think it's important to him to maintain true to sort of where he came from, and to bring that sort of street vibe, and is very sort of not afraid to go for the gang banging lyrics and that sort of stuff. And the album of his that I particularly wanted to point out, I think it is actually technically a mixtape, or I think at one point he perhaps I remember reading somewhere that he'd done it for exclusively on iTunes, despite the fact that I'm pretty certain I've heard it on Spotify, but it was released exclusively for iTunes.
Well, that's cool. A lot of artists typically, I would consider their best material wasn't a full-on, official release, like Oceanside, Stephen Wilson, Porcupine Tree, to name 3. Well, I've never heard of Schoolboy.
Schoolboy Q, yeah.
Schoolboy Q. Never heard of, I assume, him.
Yes.
Yeah, so I know nothing about this, so
well, no, that's good. And I can already hear Ace sort of like shaking his head, and I do not care. Schoolboy Q
shaking his head at you for liking him, or shaking his head at me for not knowing him?
No, yeah, definitely. For why are we talking about Schoolboy Q, Lars? We're talking about him because he's fucking dope, all right?
Hey, some of my favorite hip hop is just like, it's nothing to do with artistic merit, like Redman, Let's Get Dirty.
Yeah, fully.
Yeah, that is the stuff that I love the most, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what I like about Schoolboy is authenticity to me, whether it's, I think I was speaking about this before. Authenticity to me means a lot, whether it's a part of a musical performance, a theatrical performance. If I can believe in the character that I'm seeing portrayed, then I'm in. And Schoolboy,
honesty, integrity. You can't respect someone without that.
Yeah, too right. And he makes music, I think, for him. And he's often said on the Top Dog label, there's Kendrick, there's Schoolboy Q, there's J-Rock, and there's Ab-Soul. And Schoolboy, his albums, I think, almost up to right up to like modern day, his albums have been executive produced by Kendrick Lamar, because that's how he sort of came in. And he was just like, well, it's always worked well so far, so let's just keep it going, sort of thing. He's often said, if I don't get the thumbs up from these four guys, like no one's ever hearing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really intriguing. They're really interesting collective. They all have their own little slant on things. But yeah, but with Schoolboy, really, I mean, so much of his music is a lot of fun, and some of it can really be gritty, grimy, growing up in the hood.
I mean, just the name Schoolboy suggests this kind of juvenile attitude. I don't know if that's how the music sounds, but
no, I wouldn't quite say juvenile, perhaps, but yeah, I think he's definitely got some songs, well, definitely on this album, that are sort of like feel good, almost like party songs, and then there's some songs that's a bit more deep and moodier. But as I say, throughout it all, it just, as I say, it seems to come from an authentic place. I think that he clearly is having a great time either way doing his music, and I think that's so much of it for me is, are they in touch with the music that they're making? Is that clearly what they feel within themselves? And I think that is the secret. And I think
I hate to go back to In Rainbows again, but definitely the same with that. You can hear when a band is enjoying themselves when they're just connecting with what they're doing. And it might sound weird to think that doesn't happen with music, but of course it doesn't. I would say the majority of music doesn't have that, believe it or not, where you can feel an artist really connecting. Well, for starters, most music doesn't involve an artist, let's face it.
Yes. But I dare say that some of the most popular selling music of all time has not actually been music that's come directly from the soul of the people providing it. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I
don't know what the top selling albums of all time are. Thriller, Dark Side of the Moon, Fleetwood Mac's
perhaps I'm thinking more of like Westlife and E17 and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's definitely not.
Well, Dark Side of the Moon, Rumours, and Thriller are excellent albums with definitely art throughout. But Westlife, no.
What is that, Ricky? I've been meaning to say this to you. What is that Ricky Gervais film where you showed me the outtakes? Is it Cemetery Junction, where they've got Ralph Fiennes and he just walks up to this other character? Art.
Yeah, there's a scene where the lead character, which it isn't Ricky Gervais for once in one of his own shows, it's like goes to Ralph Fiennes' house, not actually Ralph Fiennes' house, but the character that Ralph Fiennes plays, obviously. And he's like stood in the hallway and he just notices this painting on the wall. And it's like a very narcissistic self-portrait of Ralph Fiennes, in this kind of almost like Shakespearean manner. And he's gazing at this painting, and then Ralph Fiennes just kind of slowly walks up and just looks at him so intently without saying a word, almost stares him down, and then looks to the picture and then looks back to him and just goes, art. And the outtakes for that are hilarious.
Oh yeah. Yes, ever since you started talking about this is art, I've been meaning to bring that up, and now I have.
Yeah. I'm glad you did, because that's the first thing I'm going to do after this podcast is go off and watch the outtakes of that scene, because it's hilarious.
Nice.
Anyway.
So really, this is just a great little album. I don't really feel the need to go track to track. I recommended it, therefore it is obviously good. And if you want my recommendation, you should listen to There He Go with a special commendation for the video as well. It's a really fun, sort of energetic song, and I love the video as well. So give that a go.
I'm just writing that down. Sweet. Awesome. Yeah, I haven't really got anything to add because I don't know anything about this. I mean, I will call him an artist because he's made your number. Was it number 9? You know, so I'm quite happy calling him an artist without even having heard him before. Maybe I have heard one of his tracks or something before, but just didn't know it was him or whatever. But I shall go off and listen to There He Go.
Yeah. Again, I think he's a level above your bog standard rapper. Hence why we're talking about him.
Awesome. Right. Well, shall I? I feel like you've passed that over the net to me. So
indeed, yes.
Let me respond with a glorious drop shot of an album. No, in fact, you know what? If we're talking tennis analogies, a drop shot would be the opposite of what this album is, because a drop shot is like an eloquent. It's all about grace, and you know. No, this is just an ace of an album. This is like an album that you couldn't. Well, I'm going to drop the tennis analogies now. Let's just talk about the album. This is actually my most recent sort of major discovery. So, like we talked about Tool, didn't we? And like in 2019, there always seems to be a band and a year. You know, like the year that I discovered that band, or the year that an album came out by that band. And so, with 2019, it was definitely Tool and Fear Inoculum. This was my album of last year, 2020. And they're actually a band that have been around. Well, they're not really around at all now. And in fact, this album, I think, came out in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. And the only reason I really heard of this band actually was because the fact that one of the band members died, and it kind of just made the news. And then I don't know why I hadn't heard of this band before. And I mean, talked about Radiohead, and you know, these guys were a massive influence for Radiohead. I think Tom York said this was his favorite band. I might be wrong there, but I think he named these guys as his favorite band. Anyway, like I say, this is like my most. I'm doing my typical waffle here, 3 minutes before I name drop the band. It's so, like I say, it's my recent sort of discovery, and so in that sense, it's one of the hardest to rank because it's had like less time to settle, you know. But I've given it a lot of G thought, like I have with the whole of the top 10. And I mean, I'm comfortable with how it's placed here. But I suppose it's important for me to say that, like, although I feel like I have a definitive top 10, all of them are so interchangeable. Honestly, it really depends what I've listened to the most recently. And in fact, I'm just thinking about this album. And if I went off and listened to this after this show, it would probably be way higher than number 9, if I'm being honest. But here it is at number 9, and we're sticking to that. It's cast now, isn't it? It is number 9. My goodness, I do like to waffle on before I name a film or a band, but this, I feel like even I'm taking the biscuit with this. I'm going to carry on for a minute. Why not?
Yeah, right. Why not?
So this is another British band. And they're very much cult. Like we talked about the idea of cult, you know, being unpopular or something, but no, it's not. It's just, or niche or whatever. No, it's just that it's just very celebrated and loved amongst its fan base. And right, it's about time to name this band. Do you have any idea what I'm going to say here? I bet not, because I mean, before doing this series of podcasts, Lars, we actually didn't really speak all that much over the past couple of years. So I'd be amazed if I discussed this band with you, given that I only recently discovered them.
Yeah, no, I've got nothing.
Cardiacs.
No, yeah. No, I never got that.
Right. Well, the album of theirs that I am naming as my 9th favorite ever is called Sing to God. It's a double album, and it's the one that introduced me to the band. And oh god, I could spend an hour talking about this, because they kind of started out in a similar vein to like sort of Madness and the Specials, you know, that kind of slightly kind of brass punk thing. But
little bit scarry, perhaps.
Well, a little bit, but and I suppose for the record, and in fact, it's probably important for me to state this right at the beginning here. I'm not into that stuff at all. I don't like ska. It's just, of all the genres, it's one that just doesn't grab me. The likes of Real Big Fish and stuff like that. There was probably a period in time where I first heard them and I quite like them. But if I listen to that stuff now, and Jack, my brother, if you're listening, sorry, because I know you're a fan, I'm just not. Because I hear this kind of it's like it's trying to be upbeat. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just being upbeat, it's like it's trying to be sort of zany, and so I'm not a huge fan of that stuff. I mean, I do like Madness in the Specials because they were, understandably kind of the two that stood out from that genre back then.
Oh, and ironically, I quite like Real Big Fish, but here we are.
Well, I'm not going to call you a tit, even though you are, but but the thing is, you cannot put Cardiacs in that bracket. Of all the bands that can't be pigeonholed into one genre, these are the guys that kind of, I suppose, inevitably they would get called kind of punk, progressive punk, I guess. And punk again, because Real Big Fish aren't. The ska and punk are kind of, there's definitely a blurry line between them. And I like things like the Ramones and Sex Pistols and stuff, but it's not, again, it's not a genre that I'm particularly enamored with, that I'd go off and listen to. But Cardiacs are a band that you would probably put into that bracket of punk. I think that's the first genre that comes to mind, I guess, even though they would resent being called it. But sorry, Lars, I heard an intake of breath there. Is there anything you want to?
No, sorry.
Okay.
If anything, I've just poured myself a pint, and if anything, I was sort of like, that's lovely. That is.
Oh, it was an outtake of breath.
Yeah.
Well, cheers. Clink.
Indeed. Cheers, everybody. Clink here.
Like I say, I've never been a huge fan of sort of punk. I like the energy and the sort of anarchy of it, but the music itself just never really grabbed me. I mean, my dad, was good friends with Mick Jones of The Clash. And so I had to sort of name The Clash while we're talking about punk and stuff. But I don't know, it never really grabbed me by the bollocks and got me riled up like I believe that stuff is kind of supposed to. But anyway, as usual, I'm talking about 5 other bands instead of the one that I'm supposed to be. So yeah, it was only about a year or so ago that I was introduced to Cardiacs, and this album in particular. And this was kind of the epiphany that I needed, in that area, because they have the energy of that, but just way, way more. They transcend any kind of genre, really. And a bit like the Mars Volta in that sense. And again, I'm naming other bands again. But I suppose when I talked about the Mars Volta, I talked about Deloused and that how it has this kind of feeling of like energy. It's like it's imbued with something. It's got a sprinkling of some sort of magical dust over it that just, you can hear it. And this album starts in a similar way. It's got this quite ethereal kind of intro, and then it just seamlessly tears into the first track, which is very short, but again, like I say, it has this kind of energy about it. And I'm not going to name every song on this album because it's, well, for starters, it's a double album. So like we'd be here all night. So the third track on the album is called Dog Like Sparky, which it's hard to describe this song. I mean, it might kind of sound like witless riffage almost when you listen to it, but I mean, I'll give you a good reason why it isn't. Actually, no, first of all, let me talk about kind of the lyrical, well, just the theme of the song, if you like. So Dog Like Sparky, basically it refers to one of the band members' dogs who was called Sparky. Mm-hmm. And of course, like any dog, has this wonderful purity about them. And they held this up against kind of the artifice of the Bible, shall we say?
Right.
And so basically, be dog like Sparky. And there's like the lyrics, if I'm a dog, then shake hands. It's almost like allegorical for kind of, if I have a good and pure vibe about me, then you can trust me almost. I guess that's what I take from it anyway. But musically, the key changes in this song, listen to what they do in the chorus. It's in some ways it's outrageous. It's totally original in a world which is frankly starved of new ideas. Let's face it. I cannot believe an album came out in 1996 that is as original as this is in many ways. And I mean, this goes. Like I said, I'm not going to talk through every song on the album, but this is one of those albums where like the first 4 tracks or so have to be mentioned. And track 4 is called "Fiery Gun Hand." We talked about punk. Like, I mean, if you want punk, if that's your thing, check out this song, "Fiery Gun Hand." Or if you just want if you just want to hear some cacophony, this is about as punk and cacophonous as it gets. Excuse me. That was a hiccup.
Shockingly so.
Yeah. So punk. I hiccuped at the thought of it. And I mean, the guitar solo in this track, it's about as fucking bonkers as a guitar solo can get. This is an album where I will not be inserting any riffs, because if I tried to learn any of this album, I'd probably get about 20 minutes into attempting it before I'd throw the guitar, and indeed probably myself, into the river, which I can see through the window of my office right now. No, just listen to the solo in "Fiery Gun Hand." It's the most punk thing ever. Like, it's just most punk bands were nowhere near the level in order to be able to do this, because you almost don't have to have any kind of technical ability on a guitar to be punked, you know, because it's less about the aesthetic of sound and more about the
attitude.
The attitude. Yeah, like I say, the anarchy of it. And I'll tell you what, most punk bands, if not all punk bands, would listen to this track and just be like, well, yeah, we're never going to be anywhere near that.
Yeah, the game's over. Might as well go home.
So "Fiery Gun Hand," but actually that's not the one that I'd recommend to listen to off this album. We'll get to that. Right. So anyway, this is a double album, like I said, right? So I've talked about sort of the first 4 tracks on the album, on the disc 1, and I will skip right to the end of disc 1 now, because the end of the first half of the album, if you like, the end of disc 1, closes with this sort of piano melody before basically Tim Smith, the mastermind behind basically all of this, he reads a children's story from a book over the sound of the rest of the band, like snapping some scissors together.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, you know, not this old chestnut. No, I guarantee you've heard nothing like it. And it sounds like it's being like, ooh, you know, zany. No, it works. It just works. It's one of the tracks I think of when I talk about this kind of sprinkling of like magical dust over the album. It's one of the ones that I think of. And yes, I know it probably sounds weird for the sake of it. Oh, let's do something contemporary. No, trust me, it works. And it works cohesively, which is insane in itself, really. Like, but that concludes disc 1, right? And then the start of disc 2 is the one that I'd probably recommend people listen to check out Cardiacs. I mean, all their songs are so different. So a bit like, I think it was Kendrick Lamar, you know, we were saying, you know, that it's not necessarily easy to just pinpoint one track to give you a good idea. But I guess the start of disc 2, there's a song which is probably one of them, maybe their most famous song, I don't know. It's called "Dirty Boy." And it's, I reckon this would break the Guinness World Record. Not that I think a record exists for this, right? But the most chords in a song, because it's about 9-10 minutes long or something. But again, it's not about the idea of, oh, let's write a song with the most chords ever. No, it's the opposite of that. It's the vibe of the song. I think for most fans of Cardiacs, probably the pinnacle of their career, this track. And again, it's important to say it wouldn't necessarily be on first listen. Like, this band, you need to listen to quite a lot, I think. They connected with me when I first heard them, because it struck me at how original and honest and passionate they were. But for these songs to really like weave their way into my soul, it took, you know, at least probably 10 listens to this album, really. I mean, I goodness knows how many times I've listened to this album already. You know, I only discovered it in last year, but trust me, I've listened to it enough to know it, you know, to really know it, and so I'm quite happy placing it at number 9 here. But yeah, so anyway, this track "Dirty Boy," it kind of, a bit like "Dog Like Sparky," it's got this section which is like, it's a continuous riff, but the key changes each time. And like, it's hard to describe. I can't think of any other band that's really done that before. And again, you know, it's just something that comes across as really original. You know, Oh, just yeah. So the riff plays over and over, and the key increases. So with that, obviously the vocals kind of raise and all this stuff. And I guess maybe this is why not many other bands, or maybe any other bands, have done this sort of thing, because of how sodding difficult it must be to play, like to learn all of these different chord every time. So each time it's a different, the riff is different every time, different chords. But this song ends with just one of the most epic sections of music ever. And again, it's kind of amazingly original, really. It's a simple riff of like 3 chords that gets dragged out for ages. And like the vocalist basically is like over and out, and just the like it they've looped it basically. So like it just extends like that for about 3-4 minutes or something.
Wow.
And it's so epic. Like it is arguably my favorite outro to a song ever. It's so epic. And Ocean Size, well, I say Ocean Size, Mike Venett, vocalist, covered it with one of the members of Cardiacs as well. I mean, if you were going to go off, which I hope you do, and check out this song, which is, as I say, my recommendation, Cardiacs, Dirty Boy. I don't think there's any live videos of them playing it that are particularly high quality because, like I say, they largely went under the radar. But the point I'm making is that Mike Venett of Ocean Size did cover this with like there's about 10 people on stage or something, and they actually do a really good job of carrying just the original energy of the song. And Ocean Size were another band that massively like cited Cardiacs as just like the greatest thing ever, like the band that just make me want to spend my life doing music, and so I'd be quite happy if you went off and watched that cover rather than even listening to the original song, because I think they actually do a very, very good job of conveying just the magic in that song.
Right.
So, but anyway, to close this out, and actually this is probably, I think, the first thing I said when I talked about Cardiacs, because this is the reason that I discovered them. Tim Smith, the mastermind behind all of their material, and I mean, listen to the bitter irony here, right? He actually suffered a massive cardiac arrest. And honestly, Loz, you won't be laughing at the end of this, because he suffered this massive cardiac arrest, which led to a condition which is called dystonia, which is rather like a severe stroke. It rendered most of his body just useless. So he was confined.
Oh, Jesus.
He was confined to a wheelchair, and like I probably don't know enough about the condition to say it in a respectful way without sounding offensive to at least someone. But you know how like Stephen Hawking is kind of hunched in a certain way, like, and his body's kind of contorted. Tim Smith is the same, or was the same. So he was kind of just confined to this very unnatural, uncomfortable looking position in a wheelchair. And as if that isn't tragic enough, I mean, it breaks my heart because this visionary genius suddenly was kind of stuck. The thing is, he still possessed all of that within his mind. It's that
he couldn't get it out.
Yeah, he had no means of rendering it anymore. So he was effectively his same self mentally, but physically a husk of his former self. And honestly, that to me is like one of the most heartbreaking things that like one could imagine. And he died last year, and as callous as this might sound, I'm at least sort of grateful for that, in the sense that it meant that I learned about this band and heard them,
And also, it's no state to live in, is it? It'd be a relief at that stage.
No, and honestly, I could get quite teary talking about this, because not long before he did die, he was awarded a doctorate, and the whole ceremony was filmed, and it featured many sort of well-known musicians and artists who would like always worshipped him. And as you can imagine, it was a very emotionally charged event. And so, he was there on stage. He could barely move. Like I say, well, he couldn't move really. So he was just confined to this stance. But a lot of the people at that event performed some of his work to him. And of course, he couldn't actually show what it meant, but you could just tell how grateful he was for this love being poured over him. He was like such an unsung hero, and like I say, like just a huge inspiration for, I mean, a lot of the bands that I've mentioned so far in this music series. Cardiacs are legendary without being that well known, as weird as that might sound. So yeah, I don't know what more I can say. Sorry to end it on such a sad note, but it's really sad. It's really sad. And particularly if you go off and listen to the band, you will hear this amazing energy and just like freedom, that like they didn't care if someone thought they were weird, the output, lyrically and musically, and just they're a weird band, that they revel in it. They revel in being weird. I mean, I don't even know what weird means, but you know what I mean, don't you?
Yeah.
They're just honestly, Lars, if you went off and Googled or YouTubed Cardiacs and you watched some of their videos, you would see a band that did not give a shit whether people thought they were weird. And naturally, I've got huge respect for that.
Well, that's it. I think there's definitely an element of us in there.
Yeah. So yeah, Cardiacs, Sing to God. Wow. Yeah. Just what an album. What an album. Number 9.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm sorry if I seem a little bit underwhelmed, but I've just got a very little frame of reference for this. So it's one of those that I'm looking forward to. I've already got Dirty Boy lined up for later. I'm going to really enjoy having a little look around.
You know what? Can I actually erase Dirty Boy from like the recommendation to start with? I would actually say start with the start of the album. Like there's 2 tracks, a bit like Mars Volta, the Sonne Lumiere or something like that, and then it goes into, what's the name of the first track on that album? God's sake, it's going to annoy me. Do bear with me here. Inertiatic Esp, I think it's called. So a bit like that album, this magical kind of energy, this, like I say, this sprinkling of magical dust. I've said that about 5 times, but that is the way to describe it as far as I see it. Cardiac Sing to God is very similar in the way that it starts. So actually, Lars, do go off and listen to Dirty Boy, please, and report back with your findings. But listen to the start of this album. Listen to, I don't know what the tracks are called. The song names are insane on this album. I don't know.
I've just seen on the YouTube playlist I've got in front of me, there's a song called Gibber and Twitch, which immediately took my fancy.
Yeah, which reminds me of an old classic 90s Amiga game called Bubba and Sticks for some reason, which I've just turned around and I'm looking at right now. Very fond of that game. Well, I hope we do a podcast on video games at some point, because even if it's just a one-off where we just talk about our favorite games, because it's got to be done. We're doing it. We're doing it
for sure.
But Cardiac, Sing to God, whatever the first 2 tracks are called, listen to them.
Will do. Got that queued up now.
Yeah. All right. Nice. Yeah. Wow. Well, bloody hell. We've only done 10 and 9. I guess we will wrap it up here and then get into number 8.
Yeah. It really doesn't feel like we've spent much time on it at all. And I hope you're experiencing the same lovely burst of sunshine that I am.
Funnily enough, Evesham always seems to be, it almost has its own microclimate. I hear of other people saying, oh, how about this weather? And I'm going, well, I'm looking outside and the weather's great. Don't know what you're on about. But actually right now, maybe it sounds like it's the opposite, that you've got glorious sunshine and I've actually got, not that currently.
Yes. Well, thank you all for bearing with us yet again with our gibbering. I was about to say inane, but never are we inane with our gibbering.
No, we're ane, aren't we? We're ane.
Yeah, exactly. Inane in the membrane. Inane in the brain.
All right then. Well, thank you as always for listening, and we'll see you very soon.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
All right. Tra, folks.
Chip, chip, chow.